And off we go. Hello, good evening, and welcome to everyone who's participating in this salon, and to everyone who's going to listen to the recording later on. This is Remo from New Paradigm Navigators, and this will premiere on New Paradigm Navigator podcast as well, which I'm the host on tonight. I have a really special and I would say distinguished guest, a seasoned visionary in the new paradigm, Professor Alexander Laszlo. He's PhD. He's the Director of Research at the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research, very much related to what we are interested in and doing. He's the President of the Board of Directors of Bertalanffy Center for the Study of System Science and a doctoral faculty in Sustainability Leadership at Fielding Graduate University. He's a professor of System Science and Evolutionary Development. His research and teaching focuses on evolutionary leadership, collaboration, and systems thinking. And he has worked extensively on Syntony, the science of attunement, and offers a lens through which research, education, and action can become expressions of living wholeness. So welcome, and very honored to have you tonight, Alexander Laszlo.
The honor is mine. I'm delighted to be here. I'm looking forward to exploring lots of interesting ideas.
Yeah, that's what the salon is about, to pick your brain, maybe even pick your heart a bit, and just to get to know you and introduce you to New Paradigm Navigators and ourselves to you as well, since we are, well, third year going, but very fresh in this field and very eager to know what it is like to live in this field, to work in this field, to live with these questions and dive deep with these ideas of the new paradigm. And as a way of introduction, I thought I'd ask you, maybe in simple terms, although it doesn't have to be, can be a longer answer to what for you is the new paradigm, or what for you is the essence, what captures the new paradigm for you in after maybe years of research and work in this field.
Well, we're starting with a simple, easy question. I'm kidding. This is not an easy question, and it's something which I'm still exploring, and I'm so just delighted to have encountered the New Paradigm Navigators, because that's really what I think it's about, is navigating life in what is sometimes called the VUCA, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, right? Which is also sometimes referred to as rapid, unpredictable, paradoxical, and tangled. And then there's Bani. These are all expressions for the same things: brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. These are fairly new words, or acronyms, actually, to say, wow, the pace of change and the way in which we're approaching it requires a different kind of approach, a different way of navigating, right? And so the new paradigm for me is recognizing that the old paradigm of reductionist, very what's thought of as positivistic, empirical. So only if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. If I can't, I'll believe it when I see it kind of expressions. That's very old paradigm. The idea, show me the proof in physical terms. I have to be able to address it with one of my five senses, right? That's old paradigm thinking, and understanding that there's so many phenomena in the world that we can begin to comprehend when we extend our sense of perception. But if the perception isn't with the eyes or with the touch or there's a sense of perception that also comes from a communal being, from the interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, or Bayo Akomolafe talks about the intra-being. It is similar, but the point is, there are things that we can better understand that go on in the world today by tapping into collective consciousness, by tapping into a kind of sentience, a way of sensing that isn't reduced to one of the five senses, but transcends them, but transcends them into sensing what is happening. And it's the kind of thing I'm gonna wrap up here. But the new paradigm for me involves being able to truly explore reality, or what's happening in the world, with all of our senses intact, not just these five, but the intuition, what's the feeling in the gut, the empathetic sense, the feeling in the heart, what is seeking to emerge here, And also just a sense of, is this healthy for me? Is this not healthy? Is this good? We get those senses, and it's a form of intelligence in our being that often we don't acknowledge as being legitimate, because we have to be objective, old paradigm science. That's not working in our world today. We need a new way of being. So for me, the new paradigm involves not just the science of it, but also the way of being, way of incorporating it. And having a good beard really helps. Travis is, yeah, I definitely have beard envy here. I need to get going with this, but yeah, and you're working on it, Remo. That's good. So yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, I really like, and just before this evening, I went through some of your writing and articles as well, and that's one of the kind of quotes I also underlined for myself, that we must evolve our presence, evolving in our being and sensing. Yeah, for me too. I was also trying to think for myself what this new paradigm has been, and I don't have a single sentence either, or a simple concept. Something that has stuck from the scientific and medical network is post-materialism. So going beyond the rigid, old empirical perhaps and reductionistic scientific paradigm, something about integral thinking, about maybe not organic but living systems. What else? And of course something about the transpersonal, also about the spiritual and transcendent reality, or reconnection with the transcendent reality, as a way to get to know you a bit and introduce you as a person as well. I would really like to know as well, if you can recount what kind of questions maybe did you come into this field or your field with? What was this kind of quest that started this journey for you?
Yeah, let me do that. Make it personal, right? Because I think so much of new paradigm navigation is not starting with the head, but starting with a sentience, right? It's not just consciousness; it's sentience. It's a way of sensing into it. And but before I get to that, let me stay for a moment with the conceptual frame. Travis has put this good comment here. He's mentioned that it feels like we are able to, and actually are going further than post-materialism. And I think that's fascinating. Thank you for that, Travis, because this post business, I think there's both a kind of a pre and a post holding around this, because we've been kind of exploring the world as if we're in this tower, like a medieval tower, and these five little slits that we look through. And these are the five senses. And we see all of reality through these five little slits. And science has been very much about that. And legitimate knowledge has to come through one of these little slits. But I think new paradigm is taking the roof off and saying we're connected to fields of being, from whether it's Rupert Sheldrake's work or David Bohm's work or Carl Pribram, or there's so many who are working in these field frames, right? The Akashic field and so on. So how do we recognize that we are not only this machine, because we aren't, that everything we know is in here, and that's all that we have to generate our knowledge from there, but we're connected to a field of being, of interbeing. And that it's just as crazy as trying to say in a television, right? That you would say, okay, well, look, I can see the television, and there's something with people, they're actors, they're all inside the little television, they're in the box. They must be in there someplace. Let me take it apart and find the people. We know it's not that way. It comes through the airwaves. It comes through, right, the cable, however it's coming, but they're not in the thing. Why do we think that knowledge and our way of perceiving is, our perceptions maybe are through these five senses, but we have other ways of perceiving. So for me, yes, very much also post-materialist, because it's not just this empirical, physical engagement, but we start to see things in a larger frame. Two things about that, and then I'll answer your question, Remo, sorry. But one is, even a while back now, we're talking about 100 years or so, a little less. Alfred North Whitehead was talking about this, because he has this process philosophy, right? And he was talking about prehension. Not comprehension, but prehension. So when he talks about prehension, it's the ability to sense something before we cognitively engage about it. So what we're prehending something is a way of kind of grokking, kind of like, but once you reflect on it, once you make it cognitive, it's already, you're living past the moment. You're not in the moment because you're reflecting. right? It's a moment that you're now thinking about what just happened or what you're just thinking about. But prehension is a way of a direct engagement with the moment, for example, as it's arrived, without filtering it, without thinking or associating or digesting, putting it into a category. We do that all the time. It's where we've learned this in school, how to like think about things in little disciplinary boxes. But nature doesn't come to us in these little disciplinary boxes saying biological phenomena, social phenomena, physical phenomena. No, but we tend to separate it like that. But being able to see things in their flowness, and that's why I think exactly it is post-materialist. It's also this prehension ability. And there's this other aspect that the Shea Brown had actually a researcher, a research fellow at the Laszlo Institute of New Paradigm Research, writes about post-disciplinary operations. I'm like, what? Wait, what's that? And she says that, the disciplines are very Western. I mean, when we think about a disciplinary thought, and even materialism, and I'll be interested to see what Travis has to say about it, because these are very Western concepts. She works with the Aboriginal peoples in Australia, and said, in school to teach them disciplinary ways of thinking doesn't really work with their ways of their indigenous science, for example. It's not disciplinary. So she talks about being post-disciplinary, or maybe even meta-disciplinary. Right? It's beyond the disciplines, which are Western categorization boxing of things. And so to not go on forever, because I want to make this a conversation, but I wanted to say that my experience with this, what fascinates me about this is, I'll tell you, it was like perhaps when I was 11 years old that I had this experience of being on a boat, on a sailboat, a really small one, right? It was one that fit. Really, it's meant for two people. You can sail it, but four people can be in it. So we were four, because my mother, my father, my brother, who was 5 years older than me, and myself. And we were just like calmly. My parents live in Tuscany, so we were on the Mediterranean. It was a very calm day, hardly any wind. And all of a sudden, a big gust of wind came, and we could see it going along the beach, blowing up the umbrellas. I mean, it was really almost a violent gust of wind. We knew it was going to hit the boat in a moment, and I could see that everybody was like, "What? Wait." And we gripped the boat. My father, who was holding onto the sail and the rudder, he let go of the sail and held the rudder. And the boat became like a speedboat and went shoo, like that, It's like, wow. And I was standing by the mast. Everybody else was sitting down. My mother, I looked terrified that we were going to capsize, or I would get thrown over. It's going to be God knows what. I felt so calm. I don't know why. And that's exactly, I don't know why, but there was a connection with the flow of what was happening that I didn't fight it. I kept my balance. It wasn't even like efforting. And that's the key. How can we find ways of not efforting, of flowing with what arises as it arises, being in that kind of flow? That's, as you know, is the heart of Syntony. And that's been my quest since then, to be like, how can we do that? Why is it necessary to like brace against change? How can we embrace, which is the open up the arms? The opposite of bracing is embracing. And that's for me is, I think, a big part of, again, being the change. It's not just studying it in new paradigm thought. Truly, I think new paradigm is about ways of being in the world.
Yeah, that's why I think the term navigator is apt as well. We aren't objectively looking at something, dissecting something. Although we are doing that too, we are in this, flow, let's say, this stream of change in all aspects, of our lives and world. And, I guess we're just hopefully not holding on to the sail too hard.
What would be some good metaphors? I'd love to hear from you and from others to hear what would be like a metaphor for the new paradigm navigator. It's kind of built in because navigator is like, but what kind, are we in a big boat and are we on a little, I mean, how are we navigating and what does that mean? Are we on land? Because you can kind of do orienteering, and that way also find your way. And what does it mean to be, what are some good metaphors for being a navigator in these VUCA, Rupt, and Bani times?
Well, some symbols that we have used, are kind of what is it, shoals? The rainbow writes mycelial hub. But some metaphors we have used, in terms of navigating at boats are the lighthouse, some kind of wayfinding, navigating from the stars, or the compass, as for example our heart guiding the way, or then some dangerous rocks as kind of dangerous ideologies, for example, to get stuck in. And it's very, very alive. I think we as humans, we are built on this hunter-gatherer platform in a sense. So this wayfinding and navigating and sailing, and this is so rich and embodied symbolism for us. And yeah, this year mycelial hub, mycelial networks. This is something that we are using a lot.
Right. So where's the center? Who's in charge here? That's in a mycelial hub.
Yeah, most is invisible, and sometimes these lovely colorful mushrooms pop up.
And everyone is in the center. I mean, even in the network, in the mycelial network, it's the rhizome, right? Exactly. It's a holarchy, not a hierarchy. And the beautiful thing about that is that's a great metaphor, because in the hierarchy, what happens? You get the branch of the tree and you cut off the branch, not a good thing. But let's say, or it falls off, everything down from the branch, all the twigs, all the leaves, they die. That's that, right? Because they've fallen off. But in a mycelium, right, in a rhizome, you break a connection or you cut a node and it just forms new connections. There's nothing downstream because it's interconnected as a web. And I think that's very powerful, and that as a metaphor. This another metaphor for me in terms of the flowing. It picks up on something that Travis also put in there in terms of not having to holding the paradox, living in the richness of a both and, rather than having to say, okay, one way. There is no one. There's multifinality. There's equifinality and multifinality. So there are many paths. And the mycelium also does that many pathing, right? And whose way is best? It depends on what's working for you and what's working for us. And this is the nice thing. It presents and offers a non-impositional way of engaging with flow. So try it your way, and then we can try it, and then together we can come to hopefully consensus about what is our way. But our way might be different from that group's way. Is our way better than theirs? It depends on where they want to get. For example, if we want to get, I'm in Buenos Aires, Argentina, going into winter here, so we're in the fall. But if I wanted to get to, where are you, Remo?
Estonia.
In Estonia.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get there from here, right? It's getting warmer over there. So there's a good reason I want to go there, aside from wanting to go and say hi. But what's the best way? Well, that depends. Do I have lots of money? Do I want to go the quickest way? I didn't say the quick, I said the best way. Do I want to go and see? Do I want to take an ocean liner, right, across? Do I want to? There are many different, what the best way depends on what it is I want and need, right? What resources I have and so on. So this approach, I think, for me also takes, and you need to be listening. The new paradigm navigators for me is also a very deep listening capacity. It's the ability to listen into that which is seeking to emerge and not guess or impose that I think this is what you want, or this is what nature wants, or you're not really listening if you're doing that. How do you learn how to, speak Gaia speak, as I like to talk about it, right? And that involves being more than homocentric, more than just trying to be Homo sapiens sapiens, the wise humans. We need to be thinking of ourselves as part of an ecosystem, and what would the ecosystem want, and how would the ecosystem live? And without anthropomorphizing it, we can do that. That's fair. It's fair to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I liked what you said about the mycelium, that it has no head or no center in a sense, and about listening and sensing and tuning into our capacity to sense. Because for me, this new paradigm is a lot about consciousness, and then coming to even just a little bit to understand consciousness, better. And when you were sharing your sailing experience, I remembered some of my own kind of flow states or some spiritual experiences when my consciousness has transcended in a smaller or bigger amount the bounds of my body. For example, when I have felt myself as the room, or even as the room that I'm in, or simpler even experiences when you're driving a car, you are the car, or when you are having a really empathic conversation with someone, you kind of become the person. So in that sense, I think we have this innate capacity, something perhaps that we need to remember and revive again, to expand our consciousness into other beings, or and in that sense into Gaia as well, or the universe. And in that sense, just a little bit of inspiration I started to think about leadership as well, that, if, for example, you are a part of an organization, and instead of, thinking with your head and solving these problems, problem by problem, you can kind of become the whole of the organization, with your full body for a moment, and just sense this organization as it is. How does it feel to be this organization? Where is it kind of stuck, or where is there some stiffness, or this kind of sensing into? I think perhaps this is one of the abilities that then we are reviving or cultivating for this new paradigm. What do you think about that?
I love that. And I think that's exactly, this is a new paradigm consciousness. I mean, what you're expressing, and I think what's coming also in the chat here, is a different consciousness than the old paradigm of command and control, of, the hierarchy, of imposition, of one best way, all of that. We've tried it. It doesn't work. It's gotten us into a lot of dead ends, evolutionary. And I love this, what the rainbow goddess is putting here, because they have parentheses around the D, is talking about this shamanic sensibility. And for me, we have to learn everyday shamanism, because there's also the shamanic engagement where you have, these highly sensitive shamans who are able to do tremendous things, which are all, it's a real art and skill and framing. But there is an everyday shamanism that we forget the magic in the world, and we forget how to lean into the mystery and how to work with it. We don't have to have it all figured out in order to flow with it and to feel like, this is part of who we are. I love the framing that you brought to this, and this way of navigating and of dancing. Sometimes I use the metaphor of dancing and wanting to dance the dance that the universe is doing, but I realize that it's not so much learning that dance, like the birds, the murmuration of starlings, they all move together. It's like, that's awesome. Humans don't do that. They need air traffic control to say, okay, you're free to take off, and they still sometimes collide, but the birds don't collide. It's like, and they move very fast and very close. Like, wow, I'm pretty sure they're not thinking. They are the collective. They're moving as a collective. How can we learn to do that too? It means moving beyond the strident individualism and the self-righteous independence. Don't touch me. I'm separate. That, I think, is problematic, and it's not new paradigm. So but it means learning how to also trust and be in flow with the universe and with each other, right? There's the key, and it's hard to do that. But that means it's not just dancing with, but it's being danced by. That's a huge difference. If you're danced by what is emerging, by the cosmos, by the Akashic field, by the implicate order, however you want to, if you're being danced by the pulse of the universe, then there is a kind of surrender. It's not a giving up, but it's a flowing with. And then there's a non-efforting. I'm not trying to dance anymore. Let me learn the footsteps here, and let me learn because if you're trying, I mean, Yoda, right? Yoda, there is no try. Do or do not, right? I mean, you are the flow. That's different than you are being danced by the forces of coherent evolution. And it is coherent when we can tap into those components, right, that are life affirming, future creating, opportunity increasing. There are other dynamics where things fall apart, and they're actually part of flows, and that happens too. But what do we tune into? See, that's the Syntony idea. What do we tune into that allows us to be flowed into positive, interactive dynamics? And that's what you were talking about. Several people putting those kind of things into the chat as well. This is a let me give you one more metaphor, and then I'm gonna sorry I'm talking so much, but because I want this to be a conversation. But one of the metaphor that really works for me is also having to do with boats and sailing, but it's kite surfing, right? I don't know how to kite surf. I actually I skateboard, but I don't surf. I've tried surfing a couple of times. That hasn't really worked for me. I want to learn that. But kite surfing is so amazing because you see these people who are not only riding a surfboard, so they're dealing with the swells of the waves, changing topography of the water that they have, and they're keeping a balance, right, on the waves as they're moving, and they're charting a direction. So if you're on the surfboard, you're deciding where you want to go in relationship with your changing environment, which is the waves that you're on. But now if you're on a kite surf, you got this anchor in the sky, which is so neat because it's a movable anchor. It's up in the sky, and you are also controlling that. You don't have complete control because it depends on where the wind is. But you can not go directly into the wind. You can't because the kite doesn't, right? But you can, if you know how to move the kite, you can move it pretty close to the vector of the flow of the wind, and you can bring yourself in a certain direction, still respecting the waves if you're on the ocean. That for me is new paradigm navigating, right? The change, turbulence in the moment, and then kite surfing over and still going in a direction in relationship to the changing environment. And if we can kite surf as a group, that's, maybe we all got like we're connected Bluetooth wise. I don't know what we get waterproof, but when we can like tell each other, okay, over here there's a riptide. Don't come over here, but over there, and together we can navigate better than navigating by ourselves, even kite surfing. And we can give each other heads up on swells, on like, watch out, there's some orcas over there. It's just cool, but let's leave them alone and let's go in this direction. And so things like that, we can learn to navigate better. No one of us is as smart as all of us. And that's part of the rhizomic thing as well. How do we use the collective intelligence, but still have our individual navigation process? That's for me, my metaphor.
That's a really good one. I think it encapsulates human life pretty well too. We have these layers of topography you need to adapt to and respond to and navigate. And maybe you could even adding to the metaphor, of kite surfing, you have the wind that you need to, let's say, I don't know, surf or take advantage of or find. You have the waves you need to surf, and perhaps in this kind of emerging this amount of change we are within, maybe we even don't have the land to use to navigate. We need to have a clear sky, or we need to learn to navigate from the stars, or maybe even there are some clouds covering the stars. Then we need to find some inner navigation to use to navigate, as well as keep this whole thing moving. Yeah, I had so many ideas in the meantime, but by now I've also forgotten all of them. So one thing I wanted to come back to, just as a side comment, was Rainbow's comment on shamanic sensibility, which is also has to do with this, sensing and empathy and learning, not in a scientific objective manner, dissecting something and so on and testing, but instead of taking it apart, you empathize with it, you become it in a sense. So this is, I guess, one of the origin points of that thinking, I guess, or capability.
I love that as well. There's this, I'm just also looking at this comment there that relates to what we're talking about here, where Travis is talking. Travis says, the universe seems to twinkle as we dance our own dance with the symphony, this cosmic symphony. And I love that. In quantum physics, they talk, and everybody talks about this in different ways, right? Like entanglement, right? And there's quantum entanglement. And then there's superposition of states, right? And still they're connected in certain ways over distance, non-local, even trans-temporal entanglement, right? So what does that mean for us at the macro scalar level, right? So not the quantum level, because you don't have a direct correlation between the quantum world and the macro scalar world. You can't say, well, look, we're entangled in the same way. And anyway, I don't even like the word entanglement. The entanglement is what happens to my beard in the morning. It's not a good thing, right? It's much nicer than entanglement. And he says we are intertwingled, and recognizing how we are intertwingled as beings, not just with each other humans, but with the world around us. And it's like entwined and engaged. And I like the word intertwingled, and I use it a lot because it's a good thing. And I want to find ways that we can be more intertwingled, because it's not a codependency, it's an interdependency. You don't have to, the alternative to independence is not codependence, right? It's interdependence, where we can be better together, but I can do it myself. I don't need you to save me, and I'm not out to save you. We can do it ourselves. But if we kite surf together, we can point out the risks that I might not see because I got blind spots. I have cultural blind spots. I have blind spots from privilege. I have all kind of blind spots. And if others can help me see things, then I can perhaps navigate better. But this requires a kind of intertwinglement. So, yeah, it was Theodore Holmes Nelson. Let me put that down. Theodore Holmes Nelson. Yeah. And I'm going to see if I can get that direct quote from him. But yeah. And so this is the kind of shamanism I think that we're talking about. I mean, at least what I'm talking about is everyday shamanism, is like leaning into that magic, and not everything needs to be dissected into some kind of scientific reductionism. There are ways of understanding and still having, without it being woo-woo, new age. I don't equate new paradigm with new age. Not at all. In fact, New Age often is nice, good intentions, but it doesn't, for me, provide a pathway for game changing. Standing on the beach and holding hands at sunrise and singing Kumbaya together is wonderful, but that might not necessarily create the upshift that somebody else was talking about also in this. And the upshift, we had that in here. I should recognize the person. I'm sorry, it's not fair to talk about it in that way without. Yeah, Jean was talking about, like, is it still optimal for a mycelial rhizomic kind of shift? Again, if the upshift is collective and it's mycelial and it's not impositional upshift, like you got to upshift my way. No, it's listening into, I think the universe is asking us to upshift together. Right. And what is the upshift way? It's not predetermined. We have to navigate that, listen into it.
Yeah, something that I have kind of said before is that New Age has done to spirituality what reductionism has done to science, or another way to look at it is, New Age is kind of like the fast food of spirituality. And again, to say that it's not bad innately, it has helped, disseminate some spiritual ideas, some inspiration to a really wide audience, which maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise, since they are so, easily digestible or kind of cliches. But of course, the depth goes missing. So that's what we are here to save, I think, in a sense, in this transpersonal field. I also remembered something I wanted to say before, was that talking about this entwinglement even, and then maybe the opposite of separation and ego consciousness. And I'm still kind of in between, and you can let me know what you think about this, that, this, whether kind of 50-50, whether this, ego consciousness, inverted commas, to use a New Age term, whether it has been a sort of defense mechanism or a trauma response, versus whether it has been a really important kind of developmental stage in our collective, maybe intelligence or consciousness. What do you think about that?
And we are going to invite others into the conversation here, I hope, because things are heating up here in the chat. We're galumphing and chortling, and all sorts of wonderful things are happening also in our chat space. I memorized that poem. I love that poem. That poem by C.S. Lewis, the Jabberwocky. But yeah, is this an aberration? Is this I'm just kind of capturing what you're saying here. Is this maybe we're sensing something weird? Yeah, I think this is actually, let me put it this way. The next stage in human evolution. Whoa. What's he talking about? Yeah, but I think the next stage in human evolution is moving from being Homo sapiens sapiens, where we're like all up here in our head, and moving in two directions at the same time. One is giving greater credence to our ability to sense into what is emerging as it's emerging, that prehension, that sometimes you think about it as intuition, but it's informed intuition. It's not just, I'm guessing. It's like, let me listen into what is seeking to emerge. It's a kind of empathetic intelligence with the cosmos, with what's going on around us. So can we sense into that? And so that's one aspect of the evolution of our consciousness, but it's more in the direction of sentience, not just the conscious, rational thinking. It's sentience, which sometimes is ineffable. You can't put it into words unless you put it into the kind of words that are in The Hunting of the Snark, that are in the Jabberwocky, that are in Lewis Carroll's, Alice in Wonderland and other things that are truly fantastic and fabulous, the fable of fabulous. But this is our magical world. And to bring that back in, the coincidences, because they aren't really coincidences, but they are more than human contrived alignments, right? And they're not things that can be explained necessarily with the classical old paradigm thinking, but they're ways of intertwingling. And we can get on board with that. We can learn more about that. So one is that sense ability, I think, is part of the next stage of human evolution, to be able to sense into things as they're happening without second guessing them. And the other aspect for me is learning to think beyond our individual selves. Like, again, I'm fascinated by those birds who do that flocking together, the murmuration. They can do this. How can we learn to do that? There are wonderful authors like Aldo Leopold, who asks us to think like a mountain. What? What does that mean? Think like a mountain. That's the title of his book. That's a great provocation. How can we learn to think like other entities in the mountains? The mountain alive? What does it mean think like a... Yeah, how can we think in... This is the shamanic frames, right? To be able to reach into and break out of this tower that I mentioned before, where we were only thinking along those 5 little slits that we can see the world in, sense the world in, but now we can engage with it together. So those two aspects, this kind of collective intelligence, collective sensing, yeah, and listening for that in each other. And the collective is not just with humans, right? When you walk into a forest, are you welcome there? I've walked into different forests at different times. Same kind of day, and some forests is just peaceful and beautiful, and I feel very relaxed and at home. And I can walk into another forest. It is configured the same way, same kind of day, but there's something happened there and it doesn't feel inviting. Something happened here. Maybe it needs some healing, but at the moment it's not a place I should be. But listening into that and respecting, rather than just being humans that are like tone deaf, but really listening into how nature and each other are dancing, and then dancing with that. Yeah, I think that's part of the everyday shamanism I think that's part of new paradigm navigating.
So let's maybe dance together now. If anyone wants to, then you're very welcome to raise your hand and come in with a question or maybe even a comment, and let's converse.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to just pick up something they wrote already in there, because I haven't had a chance to go through everything. It's hard to talk and read at the same time. But
hello, you both. This is a great conversation about the concept of new paradigm shifting. It's interesting that these conversations, sometimes my observation is that people feel like, they're very engaging. They excite our dopamine reserves, and we're talking about these same concepts, but we're talking about them over and over and over. And some people, my observation is that they don't find it exceptionally hands-on practical. I think some of what was spoken about, like in this, I think when we're kind of leaning towards like what are the ways of being that are most effective, that becomes a little bit more practical. I just really enjoyed the conversation. I was enjoying engaging in the comments as well. I don't have a specific question. When you were speaking earlier about prehension, and I mentioned the flow and the dancing in reflection for what you said. You spoke about the flow, and I used fully functioning very specifically because that was the kind of terminology that Carl Rogers identified as the kind of the self-actualizing person. For Carl Rogers is the fully functioning person, and it is this idea that they could act in the world in an improvisation sort of way. They don't require the defense mechanisms that keep them separate from other things, and just kind of the flow of the universe moving into us and through us. And so I think that those are beautiful things. Another concept that seems relevant is that I use a lot is Roberto Assagioli's distinct and not separate. So both of those things, we are distinct and not separate. I think that then that is beginning to get what I said earlier on, which is the I think our new paradigm shifting, just like you were saying that the new age spirituality is fast food spirituality is hilarious. But this post materialism, I mentioned that I think that we can move further even than that. And to me, that is more integrative, because I think it's not a matter of getting rid of what we have learned through the materialism. But thank you so much. Appreciate all that.
Thank you, Travis. Yeah, would you like to comment, Alexander?
Yeah, I would. I'm thinking about the ways in which you're calling into being this kind of a consciousness, really, Travis, and that is to sense these in each other as well. You were talking about Carl Rogers and his framing around this, and I wanted to also mention that Teilhard de Chardin is the one who I encountered using this notion of syntony, and he said he saw that in the future, at some point, words are going to be unnecessary. We're going to be so much in syntony, which means attuned with listening, ability to hear each other, get each other, and get the moment, that we will be, it's kind of a telepathy, right? But it's not actually in each other's heads. It's just like get where you're coming from by looking at, by the glance, by the taking it all in. It's like, again, the birds in the flock in the murmuration. They're sensing their environment dynamically and responding to it, as you're saying, Travis, dynamically. That's the whole person, whole being in their whole system, rather than their separate actors. They are part of the movement of the moment. They're part of the global gesture, the unitary gesture of the moment of life. And in that expression, they're humaning well. They express themselves in the moment, but they don't have to explain themselves, justify themselves, communicate to each other and say, hey, did you get what I'm saying? Because I don't think you're listening. I mean, we do a lot of that these days. But being able to just, this is what Teilhard de Chardin was saying, there's going to be a time in the future where we have developed our sense ability to such a point that words are unnecessary. And we're able to do this kind of flow that you've talked about, Travis. Last thing, and then I know Jean also has their hand up. So this notion of distinct and not separate reminds me of also this very parallel notion of unity in diversity. Unity in diversity. And I love that expression in the same way that if it captures the distinct and not separate, it's unity without uniformity. And diversity without fragmentation. That's the distinct but not separate. Same expression, unity without uniformity and diversity without fragmentation. This, for me, is part of our, if we can engage with the world in such a way and recognize that unity in diversity, then we can engage in what I call full spectrum humaning, right? And it doesn't mean just human, but we are, I mean, the trees are treeing. And the dogs are dogging, and everything is doing its thing in the universe. So how do we human well? That's the quest, and that's part of it. So
yeah, and this is talking about the interpersonal, mostly or largely, and there's also the intrapersonal, talking about spirituality. I think there is what you said before as well, the important qualities of discernment and integrity, to develop these without falling into some kind of psychotic soup. It's and that is the paradox, how to hold this separation or individuality and togetherness in the same space, in the same embodiment and being. Something that I want to hear from you as well, Alexander, about these is practicality of these new paradigm ideas and philosophies. And I really like this imaginative space, which is very important in the coming time. And another topic that I really like to explore is creativity. And one change, I think, regarding this shift in consciousness that I hope to see coming is conscious or intentional collective intelligence. So that would be something like, nowadays creativity is mostly, I would say, individual. You get an idea, then you explain that idea to someone, maybe someone shapes it a little bit, and then maybe you bring it to fruition. Maybe there is some kind of problem and you gather around it and solve it with a group, but it's still kind of individual. But what I'm imagining is that in the future we'll be able to maybe losing or developing our sensibility and losing these defense mechanisms or softening them and being able to empathize or connect with others in a real felt conscious manner, and then birthing something, a vision, a dream, a solution collectively. That's something that I would like to see, and that's something that's kind of mystical in one sense, but in another, I think it's actually doable and actually very practical if you can develop these abilities. And one concept I saw you write about was curated emergence, and that I think kind of captures what I was talking about, but probably a lot more. So I'd like to hear you talk about it, but we can also, of course, take Jean in, or if Jean, yeah, all right.
I'll come back. I took down some notes, so I'll do that. Let's get Jean in here as well.
All right.
In relation to the question, thank you for the wonderful conversation. I really regard your work hugely, Dr. Laszlo, or Professor Laszlo, or Alexander Laszlo.
Alexander.
And your father, I do the upshift every year for as long as it's been going. I'm very involved in that. But just this question of the prehension that you were talking about, or post-materialism, and I'm thinking of Roger Penrose in conversation with Federico Fagin and Castrap, said that he's a materialist, he just doesn't know what that means. So I think that's another way to think that, it's a form of, if one accepts the Akashic and one accepts, all the different notions of the field, but understand it as a form of materialism, but we just don't know what that material is. I find that's quite an interesting and exciting way to think about that question of the prehension, the post-materialist. Anyway, that's one point. And then the other point that I just wanted to take up was just, I'm very interested in Vasilios Bassos. He's part of the Scientific and Medical Network and the Galileo Commission. He's one of the physicists there. When he presents his work, he always talks about syntropy as opposed to entropy. And I'm very interested in what your syntony, I don't even know how to say the word, and syntropy, if there is a relationship. But my understanding, when he does he's looking at complex systems and he looks at murmuration, he always says, that closed system in the autopoietic closed system of the murmuration doesn't allow, he thinks it doesn't allow a new paradigm because it's a closed system. And he thinks the syntropy, which is this attractor coming from the future, he thinks that it's an open system, it's an asymmetrical system. So we aren't caught in a kind of murmuration. There's something else at stake for us. And that's just my question to you. It's maybe a completely confused understanding of this whole field. It's just, I'm an artist and I'm a paradigm navigator and always have been, and I'm very interested in the work that you're doing. But this is just my question. Thank you. Because I think if we need a compass for navigation, why I think your father's work is so important, we still need to be attuned to some kind of ethical direction. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Jean. Well, first of all, yes, I'm a materialist, but I just don't know what that means. That's interesting. And it reminds me of something that Buckminster Fuller said when asked, what is he? And he said the following. He said in response, so what is he? He said, I live on Earth at present, and I don't know what I am. I know I am not a category. I'm not a thing, a noun. I seem to be a verb, an evolutionary process, an integral function of the universe. See, I think this is part of the post-materialist frame. I am not a thing, a noun. I seem to be a verb. I think that's very cool. And I like that. I like that holding of things. And syntropy is like negentropy. It's exactly the dynamics and the process of syntropic systems are negentropy importing. In other words, they move away further and further away from thermodynamic and chemical equilibrium. They don't run down. They complexify. They create greater creativity, like you were talking about, Remo. They move further and further away from states of death, right? Heat death, whatever you want to put it, like this non-functional engagements. And so listening into the dynamics of syntropy, I think that's where you can also listen into what are the attractors that are calling us from future states of a syntropic universe. Yeah, that's very powerful. I think that's a very good way of listening into, using this, what I was talking about, this kind of listening capacity, the sense ability. Because when you develop that sense ability, then you can maybe develop a response ability. And there's the responsibility, right? I mean, you can develop that capacity. And the difference, though, with yes, the autopoietic process, the idea that the things bootstrap themselves up, wonderful ideas, and it's powerful in evolutionary biology. But there's a new terms coming up, like Donna Hathaway has come up with this notion of sympoiesis, not autopoiesis, but sympoiesis, S-Y-M poiesis. And sympoiesis is where things co-arise. That's exactly what I think you're calling for, Gene. That things can't arise by themselves truly in this universe. They co-arise, and that is the sympoietic process, right? So things are all the time not closed systems ever. They're always open systems. And truly in systems thinking, closed systems are theoretical constructs. If the system was truly closed, you wouldn't know because it would be closed. You couldn't access it. That's the point. So truly closed systems actually don't exist. They're theoretical entities. Even the act of perceiving implies a certain openness to perception, to be able and somehow be engaged with in that way. So sympoiesis, I think, is much more powerful as a concept than autopoiesis. It's not to negate autopoiesis, but it's to put it into a context and a rich flow of emergence. So the dynamic for me, and this is going to get to what you were talking about, Remo, as well, in terms of creativity, is maybe we start with synchronicities. Like, so, okay, so things happen, like Carl Jung will talk about, that they're meaningful coincidences. It's not random, meaningful coincidence. And you can not make a synchronicity. That's the whole point. You can't make one. You can be present for it. You can be alert for synchronicities. You can see and sense them when they happen. But that's the best you can do. You can't make synchronicities. Okay, so that's the first step, recognizing a synchronicity where things are nicely aligned, and you can be like, wow, we just said the same. We're thinking the same way. We're flocking together, like the birds. Okay, now what do? The next stage beyond a synchronicity is a syntony, and syntony is that conscious, intentional, purposeful aligning and tuning. Saying, okay, well, how are we going to flow together? How are we going to be danced and continue without making it contrived, without efforting it? How can we continue this flow? How can we be on our kite surfing expedition together and not run into each other or get our kites? That's syntony. We have to move together with the wind and all of that. And then the third stage of this, Gene, and others, is synergy, because synergy is where you do things in the world. Synergy is like, okay, we can intentionally align. That's the syntony part, building off of the synchronicities that we've seen. But what are we going to make out of this? How are we going to bring this into the world in some manifest way? That's where you get into the synergy. And the synergy, right, is where what we're doing couldn't be done by us separately. That's the sin. We need each other to do this. There's the synergy effect. Right? Where no one of us is as smart as all of us, where I couldn't lift up that table by myself, but together it's easy. Things like that, that's synergy, where we do things together. And to blend this over to what you were talking about in terms of creativity, Remo, and bringing things into the world, I'm fascinated by, okay, so what about artificial intelligence? That's definitely on these days, right? And how do we dance with that, right? Is like people are very worried about this, going to take us over, it's going to make us irrelevant evolutionarily, and I certainly don't think so. But for me, AI stands for augmented intelligence. That's what AI is. And all forms of intelligence, whether it's human or natural, that's part of what we've been talking about all here. The shamanic intelligence reaches into the natural ways of emergence as well. That's a different form of intelligence. It's not just human. So listening into those frames, that's an augmented intelligence. And then silicon. Okay, there's another augmented intelligence. It's a silicon-based, right? And it's not yet an artificial general intelligence, let alone an artificial superintelligence, right? Which is possible, but right now still very just theoretical. But learning to flow with, be in harmony with, and again, garbage in, garbage out. If we put fear into our AIs, they're going to feed us back situations that are fearful. So how do we engage with artificial intelligence that celebrate life? That's again, AI at the moment is not creating things, it's remixing things that have already existed. That's all AI can do. It can extrapolate, it can mix things that already are, but it can't sense, feel. It can't be like, I don't know, this doesn't feel right to me. AI doesn't do that. We can do that. How do we human well? together? How do we find our blind spots? And that's again the kind of sense ability that I'm talking about that I don't know if it'll ever have, but it's certainly a long way off for the moment. And yet we can use AI to help us see things, think of things, the materialist things that we haven't been thinking about or engaging with. So I think it's great. I think AI is a very positive force, provided we don't, yeah, it has no soul, as Barbara put in there. How do we bring that component in and not forget how to human well? We shouldn't become like the AI. We should train AIs to be more, and they can, to be more contextually aware of the synergy components in their environment. They can do that. They can do that.
I think one thing that AI makes possible, or something I'm hopeful towards, is precisely like you said, augmented intelligence is decentralizing intelligence, or adding, a resilience component to intelligence, distributing intelligence, and then it's now this is synergy or synchronicity. I did actually want to come into AI and technology next in terms of curated emergence, because this is something that is really emergent right now, currently, and really changing everything, as well as really malleable currently as well. Even a few years ago, social networks and platforms still probably most people aren't in keeping with, I don't know, TikToks and all that, maybe even newer platforms that have come today. But social platforms, podcasts, they have already changed, well, maybe not everything, but in a big way, how we think and how we network and how we work and how we process information and how we connect as human beings in a global sense, in a local sense, both negative and positive impact. So, but what I am really hopeful towards in that sense is this decentralization and distribution of intelligence and maybe even consciousness. I guess we'll get there. I also I know we are coming to time also, but I'd like to hear a few words about it. If you have to share about the new paradigm research, just maybe some examples, things that are, who are currently working on, or some other people in that department and institute are working on. But yeah, maybe first your comments on AI and decentralization.
Yeah, I definitely want to do that. I also want to see if there's anything that Barbara would like to share, or Jason, just to hear the voices from others. You're good, Barbara? Okay, all right. And Jason, is there anything you wanted to bring into the conversation? All right, we'll flow with it. Before I get into it's part of actually the response of what's going on with my interest in new paradigm research as such. Yes, it does involve working with augmented intelligence of all forms, right? And that's what we've been talking about here. And not somehow, it's not going away, right? The whole deal with AI is that we can try to, they've tried to unmute. Can you help them?
Yeah.
There we are.
Hi. So I am absolutely, first and foremost, just have to say it's wonderful to listen and to be part of this conversation. The first thing for me is to say that I tend to use a lot of slightly different language, but it's all graspable because you're very, very clear communicators. So you are able to give complexity in digestible forms, which is always very welcome. One thing that I would probably like to add is to this idea of what entropy is, which, as we know, is an ever-increasing movement towards general disorder. And the essence of life itself is a thriving force that brings everything together naturally in itself. So just by the fact that we eat food and process it to form our bodies is creating a grand order from huge amounts of disorder. Our ability to then replicate that through genetics is also creating and in keeping with a grand order. So that's something that I think can be brought forward into this, and because I really enjoyed also hearing about well, actually, it was a new concept to me. I hadn't heard of, symposium maybe is the concept that is new to me. So, but this was very interesting to hear you talk from this idea of synchronicity, moving that forward to how that difference to us being able to organize ourselves on an individual and then collective level. And that was a very welcome concept. Yes, I don't have so much more to add, but those thoughts come to my mind. So yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you all. Yeah.
Jason was also one of our contributors in our last symposium, contributing a really cool creative piece to the symposium.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jason. Goss. It's and language needs to evolve. Like, so it's wonderful, you're using different terms and so on, but we don't have the right word. It's like what Mr. Fuller was also saying, like, I don't know how to express this. I'm a flow of some sort, or I'm a living question mark in search of answers that lead to more questions. That's maybe kind of a way of being, but I'm not a finality. I'm not a thing. I'm not a done. And this also comes back to this idea of we talk about being human beings here. We're talking about that a lot. I don't think so. We're human becoming, because a human being suggests almost like, oh, we're done. All we have to do is be, right? We're done. No need to evolve anymore. But I think we're human becomings. We're all the time works in process. And partly our language is fixed on nouns, right? And things. So hard to get into this flows and sensing the entropies, sensing the syntropies, right? And sensing the play, the holoflux, right? That play between the implicate and the explicate orders that David Bohm talks about. And in fact, David Bohm and Karl Pribram, in fact, Bohm had came up with a whole new kind of way of expressing language. He calls it the Rio mode. I don't know if you've come across this. I'm going to put a little link here to an article on the Rio mode. But he says the Rio mode is a way of speaking that is verb-based. And some cultures have that. Some cultures have language that is much more verb-based. But we see things in such fixed, crystallized ways, and there's so little of that. Reality is a river that keeps flowing and changing, and but we seek to control it and fix it, and like, okay, now I got this, it's done. But everything is in flow. We're all the time in a dance, being danced, right? And so the Rio mode that Bohm came up with is a kind of a way of acknowledging that form of expression. It hasn't really caught on as a way, but it helps to think about the Rio mode of being and interbeing. And this bigger framing, Jason, that you're talking about also, the grand, I don't want to say necessarily purpose, because it becomes then, we get into intelligent design and I don't want to go there. And which may be, but I'm not going there. But I like the notion of macro determination, where it's like playing chess or whatever game we're playing. And there are certain parameters. And in our this universe, in the multiverse, we have certain parameters. There's gravity. There are, there's, speed of light for most things. Some things go faster than that. There are forces at play that we got to play with, right? That gives us some parameters for our own evolution. It can't be like, okay, my objective in my lifetime is to transform into a frog and live in space. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. No matter how much I'm interested in investing in science, it's just not. So we have certain things we can do within certain parameters, like playing chess. You can move your horse in this way, you can move the bishop in this way, etc. You can evolve the game too, but how are you going to evolve it coherently? So now we got three-dimensional chess. Okay, that's cool, different levels and so on. We evolve it into Go. Okay, great, I can see the connection and so on. But how do we make this so that it's coherent evolution and that there are things that we can change the game? Because I think new paradigm navigators are not only change agents, they're game changers. And being a game changer means looking at the parameters and seeing where can we shift the narrative? So it's not going to be just a change agent within the game that we're playing, but it's also how do we evolve the game? And that's being a change agent. And that's what macro determination is, where you have complete freedom within certain parameters. So there's certain things that, there's certain frameworks that we're part of a larger story. And to recognize that story, Jason, that's what I'm hearing from you as well, to recognize that there is a larger story. And we're part of this grand story of emergence in the universe. Some people call it evolution. That. And then how do we human well as human becomings in that process? The term is syntony. I'll put that in here also because That's my work. And there's a website here which hopefully works for people. But that's just about me. And on it, you will find, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll find like what's that called? An infographic on Syntony. An infographic on Syntony. And then there's some resources on what Syntony is. But that's for me, that's learning how to be in flow. The difference between flow, like Csikszentmihalyi does, the psychology for the 21st century, he talks about flow. Flow and Syntony are very similar. But Syntony is aligned with this bigger purpose that you've been talking about, Jason, which with evolutionary dynamics. It's not just following my own bliss. It's not. There's a responsibility to the dynamics of emergence in this cosmos, which ask us to co-emerge in certain ways.
In that sense, Syntony is like, flow is Syntony for being. But Syntony is also about becoming or flow in becoming and flow in, co-creating as well, perhaps.
I love that. That's a great way of expressing it. That's awesome. Yeah, exactly. Because flow is like me in my own, I can be in flow. But when you start putting that into a larger context, you start to be in Syntony, right? Exactly. Yeah. Cool.
All right, we're coming to the end of this salon and conversation, which I'm sad about. I'd love to continue this, and I hope we can. I have really and thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and evening. Maybe to close this up, would you like to share some work you are working on, or some of the projects or the work that some of the institutions you're leading and working in are working on, some things that we can maybe be a part of or take a look at?
Well, what's fascinating me is well, first of all, how to human well, right? Okay, what does that mean? And not separately, but how do we human well as part of Gaia at the moment, right? It's not just with each other, but also part of this expression of the moment. And I'm finding the most fascinating the things that happen in the liminal spaces. So the liminal spaces, like we talk about subliminal messages and so on, the liminal spaces are things below our consciousness that we can't address in old paradigm ways, which is like, I'm thinking about it, I'm aware. Liminal are things that exist in the adjacent possible, like what Stuart Kaufman writes about, or things that are not yet manifest, but that you can sense into them. Like Jean was talking about and Yasson was talking about in terms of like coming from the future in a certain way. How can you sense into what is seeking to emerge? So there's a liminal space. It's maybe that implicate order in the holoflux that we can sense into things as they are emerging. Okay, so liminal spaces exist even in our day-to-day world, like the ecotone. The ecotone is a place where two biomes meet, like where the forest and the tundra meet. Boom. That's not one biome, that's a mix. Or where a river and the ocean meet. Boom. It's not necessarily a boom, but it's like and so what happens there? What kind of beings exist there that are not in either place? There's an evolutionary potential of new things, creativity, Remo. Really, really powerful. And the holobiont is another thing that I'm researching and interested in, because the holobiont is a being made up of lots of different beings. The fact that the human being is made up, our human being is 41% human. A large majority of our physical component, which isn't human, it's bacteria and it's all other kind of microbes that don't have human DNA. But that is who we are. And it's more than half of our biology, of our own physiology. We are a holobiont. And if we are a holobiont, then, what does that mean for how we emerge and take this notion of the holobiont in the liminal space of potential that we can sense into? So this is where I'm really interested in the new paradigm explorations. How can we sense into this with a certain amount of intellectual rigor and academic robustness? So we situate this in somehow scholarly robustness, put it this way, situate this in a landscape, of epistemological landscape somehow. And it's that we don't jump to conclusions or jump to confusions. And we are, and it's somehow pragmatically relevant, right? It's like it can help. It's not just for me in my own life. This matters for our human becoming. And to how to human well. So this is where I'm interested in exploring things, Remo. At that liminal space of the holobiont and the ecotone, in all of our relations.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, in the SMN presentation, you also used the metaphor of the spark plug,
Yeah.
I guess. And one quote I really liked also was about martial arts, you know, this, what was it? If the opponent doesn't move, then I don't move. But if he does, then I will move first.
That's exactly it. No, yeah, they don't move and I don't move. But if they move, I move first. But I'm not moving, right? The whole point. Something is, if the moment I'm thinking about it, I'm going to be late. So I just completely in flow, completely aligned, sensing what's happening, and then my response is attuned to what happens. That's I think when Travis was getting at that as well. Welcome back, Travis. And we're just wrapping up as Remo was saying here, but I think that's the beautiful potential of our human becoming and of what Bio-Komolafe talks about, the intra-being. Because truly, it's not just an interbeing where we can come together and we form a bigger whole. We are in a bigger whole to begin with. That's the intra-being. That's our ground state. And to recognize that we are all intertwingled. It's our ground state, intertwinglement. So then what are we going to do? How are we going to co-emerge? How are we going to be in symbiosis, right? But it means a different way of acting than we have, which is, again, strident individualism and self-righteous independence, a very Western way. That's just not going to work in a new paradigm world. Yeah.
I love that term, that phrase. How are we going to co-emerge?
Mm.
That's beautiful. Might even use this as a title. And maybe just the last note to add to this, you know, is also fun. It's fun and play, what I got out, you know, when you were talking about dancing and being danced and this creative space. I think something really close to my heart is also play and experimentation and fun.
And I like to think of it as serious fun because, you know, this is not frivolous fun. It's not just for me to do whatever and I just being hedonistic. This is serious play. We're emerging and being, but play is very important in this. Absolutely. So I've enjoyed this play.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Let's play some more. I want to stay connected. This is awesome.
Let's do that. All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and I will stop the recording.